Okay, so that's the concepts, the set of concepts for today. And now I'd like to dig into some of them. So first of all, harmonic function. Harmonic function just means that chords have roles. They have jobs to play. Simple as that. In some kind of music, you have to tweak what we're going to talk about today. There are different styles, and they do different things. Today we're going to be talking about common practice tonality. So when you think Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, all the B's, these guys, and even to the present day where it's sort of standard tonal music, you get certain progressions. Now, I am very aware that folk-based things like the blues follow a very different tradition and will actually run counter this pattern that we're going to look at today. All right, so we're dealing with a certain kind of music, and we're going to deal with the harmonic functions in that context, even though there are other ways. Rock does other things, so there are different ways to run a harmonic progression. So, a role that chords can play. What is a role that a chord can play? Well, you've got to have some kind of a progression in which it plays a role, right? And one way to show that, to model it, is to show these symbols here. Tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic. We're dealing with music. So the pattern shouldn't be some sort of organizational structure. It needs to be something that runs through time, because that's how melodies, that's how harmonies, that's how music works. We're dealing with harmony here, so we need a sense of harmonic progression, one thing moving to another. And so what is dominant function? What is this role of dominant? What does it do? Leads to tonic. Good. So you have to have some change in time for this to make any sense, because it's music. Yeah. Good. So it's something that leads to the tonic, which is kind of like home base for us. And that's why it's appropriate for it to bookend this progression. Tonic starts it. It's your place of home, the place from which you depart, and then it's also the place to which you return at the end of your day, even if it's a long trip. Some of us have to go further than others to get home, but it's that place that comes back at the end. So that stable home place is called tonic. And what's predominant? It precedes or leads into the dominant. Now, whenever you have a function or a role, it would be silly to create a category unless different things could jump in and do that role, right? So if you have a quarterback on a football team, it's the person that sticks their hands where they really shouldn't, and then grabs the ball and then throws it, or hands it off, or but that's a certain role that you can play on a team. But different people could come in. If that guy gets injured, hopefully there's a second string and maybe a third, So you have different people that can come off the bench and play that role within the team. Now, this isn't a layout on a field. It's chord progression. So here you're talking about different chords being able to do this job of leading into the dominant. And that's what predominant is. So what things could serve as a predominant chord? Two is good. That's the main one. Four, good. Any others?
7.
But is usually dominant in function. Yeah. So even in rock where that happens a lot, 6 is good. 6 is a little less common. 2 and 4 very common. You might notice that they all have something in common. They have a scale degree in all of them that's distinctive of this particular function. 6. Especially in minor, 6 has this drive to go to resolve. Remember talking about resolves for good? Now we're talking about a resolve. It's a pull. It's a strong pull in another sense. It's a need to go from something unstable to something that's close by and more stable, so that you feel a relaxation into it, right? That's what resolution is musically. So we've got flat 6 in minor, a half step away from scale degree 5, and that just feels so right when the one resolves moves to the other. Because 5 is stable, and 6 is not. And so when it gets there, we have this sense of relaxation into it. So a common thing in here is scale degree 6. Well, in there, you can think of it as the engine that makes the chord progression run. It's the motor inside there, pulling the chord to the dominant. How about dominant? What chords can do it? Play a dominant, John. Good. 5, 5th scale degree with the triad on it, and
7.
7, yes. Now, that's a different function. So, in this case, we're talking about 7, not just any old 7. I mean the leading tone 7, and it needs to go where? 1. Again, there's the half-step connection. There's the stability and the instability and motion between the two using this really close half-step motion creates a strong pull in our mind. So 7 goes to 1 and is, again, kind of like 6 going to 5. It's this driving force there that it's the engine inside the chord that pulls it where it goes. Now, a little tweak on this was introduced by Daniel Harrison, who was at Eastman when I was there, but now he's at Yale, and he wrote a book about chromatic harmony, and one of the things he points out is that these scale degrees have different effects depending on where they are inside the chord. So if they're he calls it the bass, but he means the root. If it's the root, he's writing bass like this. I don't think we need to remember that, but if it's the root, it can guide the chord. If it's the third of the chord, he calls it the agent, to show that it then becomes really determining. It's the power. It's the thing that drives it. If it's the third of the chord, that 7 is gonna make it a dominant function chord. But if it's the 5th or something else higher up in the chord, it has less and less of an effect on the behavior of the chord as a whole. So here, that scale degree, in those positions, the scale degree determines harmonic function. And just think about what that means. We'll take scale degree 7 first. So if you're in C, here's your leading tone, and we're going to put that as different chord members, or maybe since it's going to be in various chord members, serving as various members of the chord, I'll put it up here. Okay, so if it's the root, it's a 7 chord, that's going to be dominant in function. It's going to lead to your 1. If it's the third of a chord, you got to sandwich it like that, and the root is G or 5. So again, as the agent in this chord, the third of the chord, it determines the behavior of that G chord. What's the function of a 3 chord?
Much more ambiguous.
Very ambiguous. What's that?
Fine.
Yeah, it's usually, most commonly, it's a stand-in for a 1-6, so it substitutes in for it. Most of the time, it can be dominant once in a while, but it's usually a stand-in for a 1-6. In other words, tonic. So here, we end up with dominant, but here, in some others, we end up with tonic in function, even though scale degree 7's in there. So you see, its position in the chord actually does matter. All right, and then I'm going to make it the 7th of a chord. What's the chord now?
Major 7.
Yes, 1-7. Well, obviously that's tonic in function, so it's just flipped. Its whole nature changes. If it's the 7th of the chord, it does not need to go up anymore. It needs to go down. Chordal 7ths resolve down by steps, so it's lost its effect on the chord. In those two positions, root and third, the scale degree determines the harmonic function. Otherwise, not so much. So with that little tweak in there, we can, and that's an important tweak, we can say that these scale degrees and those functions, the scale degree functions, actually drive the progression. But I have to qualify it or else it's really misleading, right? That makes sense though, because a chord is a bunch of different scale degrees all put together. They can't all have their way all at the same time, right? They're going to duke it out, and somebody's going to win. And he's saying actually it's the ones that are serving as root and third that have the determining effect. All right. Any questions on that? All right. So this is called the phrase model. Phrase model, where you say, hey, basically you're going to have tonic chords, you're going to have predominant ones, dominant, and tonic, and they'll come in that order. Phrase model. So it models progression over the course of a phrase. And by the way, they can be used several times within a phrase. You can have a situation where you do a progression to tonic that is maybe 2-1-6, so it doesn't feel done yet. And so then you have to pick up with that predominant and run the progression again. And that progression can get you to closure if you deliver a stable one at the end. But it's modeling the way phrases work. And just like clauses can have all the parts of grammar, so you can have a dependent clause, so to speak, in music as well. But that doesn't negate the fact that that is a really good model for how progression works in common practice tonal music. Okay, so that's a nice, tidy little bow on that. But now we got to open up a whole nother world that shows that actually there's a lot more to harmonic function, and there's a whole lot to melody, harmony, interaction that we're not accounting for here. So get ready. Here's another whole set of functions. It's still harmonic function, but it's not members of the progression. So this is about progression. Phrase model models progression. Now we're going to talk about prolongation, where you can take a function and stretch it out and embellish it in different ways. Okay, so let's see, what's my best example? Okay, why don't you flip to, on your example sheet, we'll come back to Equilibria here in a second. Look at third sheet in, Haydn string quartet in F minor. You can see an example of this very thing. The punchline is that when you invert a dominant chord, it becomes way less stable. And when it does that, it tends to embellish the tonic. And we use the embellishing motion in the bass to label the chord. So, in this case, let's see. Sing that tune with me. Here we go. I have so much trouble with this stupid keyboard. I wish I had a piano here. Okay, here we go. Here's our opening. 1, 2, 3, 4. Lovely. Yeah, okay, now look at the bass line. Here's your one chord. Nice root position, solid, stable sound. And then you get this. Is that stable? Now that just begs for resolution, doesn't it? What makes it unstable?
The leading tone on the bottom.
Yes, that needs to go back up, and that's exactly what he does. Needs to go
The seventh tune, right?
Yes, the seventh, very good. So you got this dissonance in there that needs resolution. Yeah, so you need both of those resolutions to happen. So it's also dissonance because of those. That's a tritone from the 7 to the yeah, so there are all these factors here. The inversion, the the dissonance in the chord, the leading tone exposed in the bass, and make it really need to come back here. Now, if you were to put a D underneath it, it wouldn't be wrong, but there's a more subtle way of viewing it, and that's to say it's embellishing. It's not D, which projects, dominant, solid, structural. No, it's not that. So instead we write in because of the neighboring motion in the bass. Now I know that this melody goes here, and then it goes here, right? It goes here, F, G, A flat, overall. If you get rid of all the squiggly lines moving around. But if you just look at the basic thrust of it, downbeat to downbeat, it goes F, G, A flat. You with me there? That's passing motion. So why not passing chord? Well, you could, but why do we focus on the bass and name the chord according to the bass motion, that neighboring motion in the bass, 1/7/1? Because we associate bass line with harmony as a support for it, as the foundation for the chord, whereas the melody is in counterpoint with it. So we tend to associate bass line with the harmony. Okay, so that's why we do that. We use the bass motion to name the chord. Here we have neighboring motion, 1/7/1, decorating our tonic, 1/7/1, and so we say N for that chord. Neighboring chord. That's prolongation. Now we have to move over here, and I can get rid of my extra stuff, because in this case, it's going to go, after expanding my opening tonic, it's going to run the phrase model and go predominant tonic. It's going to progress at the end. And now you need a root position 5. It's 5/7, isn't it? So it does have dissonance, but because it's got the solidity of that dominant 5 underneath it, it sounds more stable. And so when it moves to the 1, it feels like you're really landing somewhere new because you went somewhere far away. The 5 sort of asserted itself in that root position status. It asserts itself as a new place so that when you come back to the 1, you feel like you really had to move there. Whereas the opening one, because you're just neighboring your 1, the 5/6/5 just feels like decoration instead of as something that really progressed and went away. So when you come home, it's like, well, I didn't really get away. So I like to use the analogy of my trips out to the curb. Thursday mornings, the trash people come and pick up trash. So I go out to the curb and I come back home. I just neighbored my house. And when I come home, nobody's going to give me hugs and kisses. I haven't gone far enough away. I haven't been really away. I've been outside the house and back, but that's not really progression. That's prolongation of home. And then I go to work. I'm probably not going to get a bunch of hugs and kisses on the way back. But let's say I go across the globe and do a Japan trip. And then I get home, man, you're going to give me some hugs and kisses now, people. Come on. Because I've been away and now I'm back. That's progression. Coming home after getting that far away, that's a progression. Whereas my trip to the curb and back, that's basically home. I've embellished my home a little bit, but I haven't really gotten away from it. I'm still in the orbit of home when I do that trip. So this is subtle, but it's meaningful. It captures something about the chord when you use that N instead of a big D. See the difference between those two? So when you have an inverted dominant, you're not going to use D. You're going to use N, P, for passing, incomplete neighbor, for a situation where you're connected by step on one side and there's a leap on the other. Okay, so all those embellishing motions that you know about, when they show up in the bass and involve that dominant, don't give it a D. Give it one of those embellishing labels and see where it goes. It goes above the main thing. So the main thing here, thing being embellished, is tonic. So we show that. The weightier things sort of filter down, settle to the bottom, whereas the less structural, less stable things end up higher up in our analysis. So this would go underneath the score. Okay, so that's some harmonic function, but we left one thing undone. What's the predominant chord here? I'm going to put these above so that it looks like what you would write on your score. you put the function labels below, and now we're in minor, so I need to do this, don't I? And I'll write it here too so you can see it. Okay, so this is prolongation, and this is progression, but progression from what?
Minor
Yeah.
tonic.
Yes, what is it?
Minor 4.
Oh, it's not quite.
2 diminished 6.
2 diminished 6, good, yeah. Do you see the G up there? It arpeggiates that very chord when you sing it, right? Okay, so when you sing this, when you perform it, if you're the first violinist, how would you shape the phrase, given that you know that you're hanging out on tonic and then moving on to the predominant? Is there some way that this influences a good performance of it? How would you, say you're doing a master class, how would you direct somebody to add some dynamics here if they kind of did a flatline performance? What would you do? Hold on, let me get this. Go for it, Forbes. What would you do?
You follow the arc of the phrase with your dynamics. I mean, there's obvious movement up in the bass line, then you get 2, 5, 1, that kind of thing. So you emphasize that climbing mountain that Haydn does. You're trying to get to the climax, and then you fall down to the back to tonic.
Okay, good. So we're going to do this number here. Good. And then do you want this to be the loudest point, the predominant, or the dominant? What do you think?
That point in between the predominant and the dominant, that D.
Ah, okay. So we'll do this kind of thing. All right, let's give that a shot. See how that sounds. So you're going to climax on the downbeat of measure 4.
I mean,
in it, right?
On beat 3, on beat 2.5 of measure 4.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, let's give that a shot. Measure 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, I like that. That's nice. Good, yeah. You like that? Going through it? I think it would be nice because we were kind of going the whole way to instead be a little more nuanced about it. So we'll kind of let notes have a little life inside them. La da dee da da. You can come away from it, but then grow da dee da 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 dee dum. And you got that pregnant pause there, right? La da da dee da 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 da. And you can sort of grow and let it go from there. You see what I mean? But let's try that now. So don't go on every no. You know what I mean? It's too much, right? So let it grow in the midst, and then come away and do it again, and then So don't feel like you got to keep the dynamic doing this, but kind of like a melody can wend its way to the top. Let your dynamics have a little more life. Okay, one more time. But keep that overall trajectory. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good though, I like it. I like that. That's really nice. Good. Do you like it that way? I think it makes sense because there's something intense about this, and then from here on out, once you get to the dominant, it's like, okay, I know where we're going. We're just coming back. So there's something usually very special about the predominant, and that category just has so many things in it. Think what else could serve in that role. Predominant function. All the fun chords. Come on now. Like Neapolitan 6. Augmented 6. 7 diminished 7 to 5. 5 7 to 5. All this chromatic stuff fits in that category, right? Lots of stuff. A lot of the fun stuff is right there in the predominant. Okay, so we've got, again, melody and harmony interacting in a huge way here because it's the melodic motion of the bass that makes it neighbor and of the melody in the top part rising by passing motion through it. You're blowing through it and going somewhere else. So the overall trajectory is actually over a here where you have the progression, right? But it's the melodic motion of the outer parts that qualifies the way we hear that dominant. We don't want to write D. We want to write N because of the motion, the melodic motion. So melodic motion, especially in the outer parts, influences the way we hear harmonies. You see how they're working together? There's a real interchange, an interplay between the two, harmony and melody, in harmonic function, both because scale degree functions influence behavior of chords, but also because outer voice motion really changes their whole meaning. The meaning of the chords are different. This is like a car spinning its wheels, not getting traction, and then go, and go somewhere. So this is motion that doesn't progress anywhere. This is motion that progresses. Prolongation, progression. Two P words, but very different in meaning. Any questions about these thoughts? All right, let's look at something where you can apply this. So if you'll turn to the very first page, I'd like you to figure out where progression takes place and where prolongation takes place. Let's get to know it first, and then we'll spend some time to put Roman numerals and then harmonic functions underneath the score. But let's get singing it before we... Oh, I'm still in minor. I need to be major though. Okay, ich liebe dich means I love you. I love you as you love me in the evening as in the morning. There isn't a day where you and I don't share our cares or our sorrows with one another. Okay, I want to do minor so badly. Okay, ich liebe dich. If you want to do German, that's fine. If you just want to use movable law, that's fine. Whatever floats your boat. Okay, here we go. 1, 2. Listen to the chords once. Okay, so take a moment and just label the harmonies. Invert. Chromatic passing motion to here. And figure out this chromatic chord on the C sharp. And here, that sound. And then you got some waiting to do before this finally gets where it needs to go. But there's your resolution. When you've got the chords labeled with Roman numerals and figures, drop down a level and put these harmonic function labels beneath them. Show how long the opening tonic lasts, how it's embellished, in other words, how long it's prolonged, and then where the progression kicks in, use predominant, dominant, and tonic for that. Now make sure that within that tonic expansion, where your tonic is stretched out with a line, that above the line, you show the meaning of the chords that are within it. Because if it's not tonic and you're showing T, you need to explain what it's doing there. You can't just have a 5 chord in the middle of a tonic expansion and not explain it in some sense. It has to be embellishing, or you're going to have to rethink your tonic in the first place. Scratch it if you can't explain it. You'll have to do something else. I give that a chord label just so we've got one more chord in there. What's that chord? Check that out. C, D, G makes. Yeah, let's label that one too.
Oh.
No, I just don't know why I can't put G over B.
You can actually do,
Good, you've done.
or sorry,
See what's so cool about this, yes, of that.
Well, that's good actually.
Of that, right? Okay, but put 6, 5,
Yeah.
6.
And would I have a question about a T and 5. So it looks like according to what you said, this is just
Try the first version.
expansion or
Then you have
right.
Right.
triad second
This is
version,
T
seventh chord,
and
tone
this
version,
is man.
seventh chord, first version,
Now notice
second.
how it leaps away. Step, leap, and
This
this
crap.
steps to there.
I mean, worst case scenario, just look at the arrows.
Kind of
Just put it as close as you can.
If that's an embellishing tone, what would you call it?
I don't know.
How do you write
You know,
major seven?
skate tone?
Like Roman numerals?
Or,
That's-
you know,
yeah,
just
that-
read all
I learned on the short
I think so, that's what I use.
Oh, yeah.
What's that?
It's the broader category is just incomplete meter.
I don't know.
So you should remember that in
Well,
that.
We call it
At the same time, it's not really
Yeah, that's good.
functioning as anything.
Huh,
but
okay, yeah, that's the right.
Yeah, but that's major seven chord.
Good, yeah.
It's not functioning as anything.
Thinking more like
These
double
technically,
layers.
Because they're
right,
both
double neighbor works
suspensions
too.
holding up.
So a double neighbor is
Yeah, but I
basically
think that's
two
a suspension of
incompleteness
five.
So
It's
that
still
works
five,
too.
but there's, it just has the.
Yeah, I know.
I forget
I understand there's the same chord that's dominant.
I know, I'm saying I don't think it's functioning as.
I do, you can use that. I'll show you what I do.
I was just wondering,
Yes, I'm aware. I mean, there
Well,
is.
I know, but it's
but
but
for
above
this-
the suspension in between. It's not the base.
Is the case,
Alright.
anticipating
Yeah, we'll talk about
where
that. Yeah,
No,
here,
it's definitely on one chord.
that works,
it's not,
but
it's not
because
functioning
you're
as a tonic.
referencing a different
Here
key,
is a tonic and here
think
you're
of
at
this
also.
key, the key of D.
Oh,
You
Yeah,
can
there,
label
that'd
that
be fine.
in.
okay.
You know how to do that?
You have
Yeah,
one
okay,
foot in the
cool.
door, it's like.
I know. I know.
Yeah, you're there. So that's the tonic.
I get that.
Let me just
but it's
ask
kind
you
of
this
not
question.
Yeah.
Why do we care about harmonic function in the first place? Is it useful? How is it useful, if it is? What? How is this idea of harmonic function useful? Does it help you somehow?
Helps you guess kind of what's coming up.
You can make educated guesses. That's awesome. That's powerful. Because you don't have to go, okay, let me start. You know, you don't have to start from scratch every time you look at a new chord, right? You don't have to go, okay, G, B, D. Well, you're in the key of G, right? Okay, so if I see a G chord, something built on G in the bass, at the beginning, it's probably one, you know? And then later when I get, I'm waiting for some motion away from the tonic, probably a predominant chord, I can look for those patterns. I can be expecting certain chords to happen. And when you work, not blind, with your blinders on, but you have expectations, you have educated guesses that you're making, you're asking, what is this compared to what I expect? And that's always faster than just working from scratch. You see what I mean by that? That's powerful. That really helps you orally and visually track with the music with comprehension much quicker, much faster than you would otherwise do it. So yes, that is very helpful. Okay, so the beginning. In the beginning, we have 5, 4, 3, 5, 6, 5, and our 1. More 1 going on here, so still 1. Chromatic passing tone, I wouldn't make that a harmonic event, I would just see it as passing here. And say it's basically 1/6 all the way to this 4 chord here. Okay, so tell me about harmonic function thus far. What's happening? Tonic expansion, good. So we use this symbol for everything up to this change there. Okay, now how about functions for these guys then?
It's a double neighbor.
Good, you can write double neighbor and capture the whole pattern as one big unit. Or a double neighbor is always built out of incomplete. Good, incomplete neighbor. So that, if you're getting specific, that's an incomplete neighbor chord. And this is an incomplete neighbor chord. Now remember, échappé or escape tones are one kind of incomplete neighbor. Appoggiaturas are another kind, but incomplete neighbor works for all of them. Wherever there's a stepwise connection on one side and a leap on the other, either way, wherever the step can come first or second, but you've got to have this combination of step, leap, or leap, step. Either way, you've got incomplete neighbor. And that word works no matter what the metrical context might be. So incomplete neighbor is really handy for these situations. Okay, so any questions about this chunk of the music? What's happened thus far? Progression? Not progression, but prolongation. Good. We've prolonged tonic. We could also say we've embellished tonic using these inverted dominants. They're unstable because they're inverted, and there's a embellishing pattern, a double neighbor pattern running all the way through those first 4 measures. Okay, now we get to move. We're going to progress. So what's this chord right here?
Dominant 2 chord.
You could say that, and it would be true because 2 is the root, but there's a nuance. Good. It's a 5, 6, 5 of 5, right? So normally people will. So this chord has been sort of eliminated from our vocabulary because we think of it as tonicization. Thinking of D as tonic for the moment, we're borrowing a chord from the key of 5, from D major, and saying, hey, all that stuff you know about how to resolve a 5, 6, 5, you do it here too. It's all the same. You don't have to learn anything new. How do 2 chords behave? Oh, they can. No, you don't have to. Don't start from scratch. You already know what to do, right? If you're going to learn how this chord works, it's the same thing. You just got to think in D, and then what you did in G, resolving here to here, that will happen here as well. So that's the symbol for that chord. Okay, and then we go to cadential 6/4. However you learn to show that. And if you use 1/6/4 there, I won't have a fit, but I'll show you why I like that symbol in a second. All right, and then show that there's the one that follows. Okay, so harmonic function, 4 chord. What's its job? Predominant here. This chord? Also predominant. Not dominant. You see why? It leads you to the dominant, but it is not yet the dominant. It's 5 of 5, so more predominant. Expand it a little bit beyond the 4. Okay, and then dominant. Good. Now, if you have a 1/6/4, you have to write cadential to show that it's embellishing, because what's a 1 doing inside of a dominant prolongation, right? Dominant? It's dominant, even though it looks like a 1. That's not a resolution to 1, though, is it? No way. It's really dominant. We were prepped to hear it that way, and we will hear it that way. Stretched out and then tonic. Tonic does not arrive here. It arrives there. Okay, so predominant, dominant, tonic, progression.